Okay, hello everyone, and welcome to the 8th session now in our International Perspectives on Corpus Technology for Language Learning seminar series, organized by the University of Queensland, myself, together with our partners from the State University of Sao Paulo, Brazil, or UNESP, and various partners around the world, UK, and Europe. Tonight, we are very honored to have Dr. Anna Frankenberg-Garcia present on data-driven learning support for academic English writing, an area in which she is a renowned expert. And before we begin our proceedings today, I'd just like to begin with quick acknowledgement of country, whereby the University of Queensland acknowledges the traditional owners and their custodianship of the lands on which we meet. We pay our respects to their ancestors and their descendants who continue cultural and spiritual connections to country, and we recognize their valuable contributions to Australian and global society. So, without any further ado, we're going to introduce Dr. Frankenberg-Garcia. And this week, the introduction will be handled by Dr. Paula Pinto, who one of our previous presenters in this seminar series and one of the co-organizers of our seminar series. So take it away, Paula.
Okay, so welcome everyone. It's a pleasure for me and an honor to introduce Dr. Anna Frankenberg-Garcia, whose work I have admired for so long, and I'm sure many of us who work with corpus linguistics and data-driven learning, translation studies. So it's an honor and a pleasure to have her presenting today. Dr. Anna Frankenberg-Garcia is a PhD in applied linguistics from the Edinburgh University. She's a reader in translation studies and program leader of the MA in translation at the University of Surrey. Her research focuses on corpus applications in lexicography-assisted writing and translation. And Anna has worked as a principal investigator of the Collocaid project leader of the Corpora Parallel Corpus, chief editor of the bilingual Oxford Portuguese Dictionary, and UK partner in the supporting the internationalization of Brazilian research project. She has recently co-edited a volume of Corpora in ESP and EAP writing instruction published by Routledge. And some of her latest work includes open access journal articles available from the Recall Language Teaching, from Recall Language Teaching, Journal of English for Academic Purposes, International Journal of Lexicography and Target. So thank you very much, Anna, for being with us today, and the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Paula. It's my honor to be here today, talking to so many people around the world. I can see 75 participants, so wow, that's excellent. So without further ado, I'm going to talk about data-driven learning for academic English writing. And just so you know where I am based in a little town called Guildford, which you can see here on this image. This is in the beautiful English countryside where the University of Surrey is. And we are only like 40 minutes by train from London if you ever want to visit. So I will begin my talk with a little exercise for you, and I would like you to fill in these gaps, please. And I'll give you 2 minutes, don't get too stressed. Okay, it doesn't matter if you haven't got all the gaps right, or if you have found too many answers. Let's talk a little bit about this exercise. if I ask you what kind of English these sentences are about, you'll probably say something like it's a little bit like formal academic English, written English. And if I ask you, can more than one word fit each gap? The answer is yes. In most cases, more than one word fits each gap. Let's look at some of the possible answers. So for number one, you could perhaps say clearly apparent, especially apparent, immediately, readily, and so on. Here are some possible verbs that you can use in gap number two. Here are some adverbs for gap number three, some verbs for gap four. Here are some adjectives describing increase, and here's a preposition before prices and after increase. And here you have another preposition. So what you see here is that some words are really fitting well in these gaps. For number one, it looks like, oh, these sound very fluent, but you couldn't say perhaps the contradiction was not beautifully apparent, although beautifully is also an adverb. You don't really, it doesn't really fit here. Then you can see in gap 5, the second gap in 5, you can see it's a grammatical gap. Only one word really fits, and same applies to 6. So what we're talking about here are gaps for testing your recall of academic English collocations or word combinations that we very often see in written academic English. Let me define collocation then first. So I'm using here collocation in the Freudian sense to refer to lexical items occurring together more frequently than just by chance. So, for example, look at light increase and slight increase. If you look up these combinations in the Oxford Corpus of Academic English, let's look at light first, and you can see it's very frequent in the corpus. If you look at slight, it is not as frequent. It's quite frequent, but not as frequent as light. But when you look at these frequencies, one word left of increase, light occurs only once in the corpus, whereas slight occurs 97 times. So from these figures, you can devise some statistics of word association strength. And here I'm using the log-die score. And you can see here that light increase is not really a strong word association. It's not statistically significant, whereas slight increase is very, there's a very high association here, strong association. Collocations and language learning. Collocations are notably difficult for second language learners. There's lots of research on that. And second language learners often lack awareness of collocation constraints, what words go well together in another language, especially when first language and second language collocations clash. So for example, you say depend on something in English, but in Portuguese, you would say depender de algo. So depend of something. So here's a collocation clash, and this can be problematic, can lead to error. What about collocations and English academic writing? Well, collocations are key for effective academic writing. John Flowerdew speaks of linguistic disadvantage among second language users of academic English. And here you have an example from a study I did with Paula, the person who just introduced me a while ago. And we did this together when she was working here at Surrey with me on a sabbatical. So we built this corpus of Brazilian written academic English. So these are papers by Brazilian researchers that have been written in English and published in local Brazilian journals. And you can see here the verbs that are used with results. So results shows, the results suggest, the results indicate, and so on. Now, if you compare this with the same collocation in a corpus of expert academic English, and I'm not talking about native speakers of English, I'm talking about international English represented in the Oxford Corpus of Academic English, with researchers from all over the world who publish in English. And you can see here a number of substantial differences. So you can see that in the Brazilian academic English, there's no evidence of error really, because these have been proofread and edited. They are published journal articles. However, you can see that in the Brazilian corpus, there's a limited collocation repertoire. There are a lot fewer collocations. There's also a little bit of a misconception in relation to collocation strength. So, for example, you can see here results corroborate coming up very strongly in the Brazilian corpus. And it's not wrong in English to say the results corroborate, but it's not really something you say as frequently in English. And you can see here the results support in the expert corpus, but it's conspicuously absent from the Brazilian corpus. So another thing is you can see perhaps some evidence of collocation avoidance, and you can see here the results reflect whatever, and it's very common collocation in expert English, but it's not present in the Brazilian corpus, even though the results reflect is, you know, it's not something unusual in Portuguese, it's a cognate. You could say os resultados refletem. So reflect, refleting is a very similar word in Portuguese. But it's not just second language speakers that have problems with academic English collocations. I did a study where I found that undergraduates who are new to academic English also experience collocation difficulties. And this is not surprising. If you look here how collocations, and here the word table in two different senses is highlighted, how the way you use the word table in general English is very different from the way you use table in academic English. So it's not surprising that if you're new to academic English, you might also experience difficulties. So there's this general consensus that there are no native speakers of academic English. And what matters here is exposure to the target, not just the target language, but also the target register and genre. So if you don't read much in academic English, you can't really be familiar with its specific collocations. Collocations can also impact how academic texts are perceived. So I'll give you a little exercise. Which of the following is easier to read? Okay, so the only difference between these two sentences is that in one, this is not a very common combination of words, whereas this is a strong word association. This is a very strong academic English collocation. And the same here. Collocations are read as a single chunk rather than word by word. And that's why it's there. Sentence 2 is probably much easier to read. People familiar with academic English read effective use and greatly improve as a single unit rather than a separate word which you need to put together. So collocationally rich texts are perceived as being more fluent, and they are processed with less effort. And in the highly competitive world of academia, less fluent manuscripts can be rejected just because they don't read well. it also impacts student assignments, where essays that are harder to read can be marked down. So who can benefit from academic English collocation assistance? Well, first, researchers from all over the world, especially researchers with English as a second language who have had less opportunities to read and write papers in English. You also have students in higher education, especially students with English as a first language who are new to academic English, so undergraduates. But also students with English as a second language who are attending English medium institutions. So Chinese students attending my university, for example. And where can users of academic English get collocation assistance? Well, there are lots available. So you have corpus-based EAP vocabulary textbooks. So you can see here academic vocabulary in use, focus on vocabulary, and they're based on academic English word lists. You even have a textbook on the use of collocations. You can also look up collocations in corpus-based dictionaries. Here's a screenshot of research in the Macmillan English Dictionary. And although what you see first is the definition, if you scroll down and you read the entry a little bit more carefully, you will see here some concordances with examples of research and context, and some common collocations here, grammatical collocations, research into, research on, and then a lexical one to carry out research. And if you click here, you can navigate to the collocation dictionary, where you can find lots of collocations here that go with the noun research. You can also go straight to the point and look up collocations in collocation dictionaries without having to go through, navigate the entry. And if you use the Longman Dictionary, there's even an appendix listing around 2,400 academic English collocations from the academic collocations list by Ackerman and Chen. And then there are other collocation resources available. So this is just like a search engine, NetSpeak, where if you use a little question mark in between two words as a wildcard, it will show you lots of words that fit into the context of research and that. And you can see here all these verbs. Of course, you don't always get what you want, and you can see here that these don't feel. So there is some noise here, and you need to be able to be savvy enough to know that research gap that will give you a verb in between. So they can be useful, but you need to know how to navigate these resources and interpret the results. One of the earliest collocation resources available is Just the Word, developed by Pete Whitelock. And this is based on data from the British National Corpus. The interface is a little bit old-fashioned, but still it's a really good resource. And here's my favorite scale or sketch engine for language learning, which is very easy to use, and it's based on a corpus. So unlike search engines, there's some control over the kind of English behind it. And the tagging is pretty good. So you can see from this screenshot how you use verbs with research, and it's separated: verbs with research as subject, verbs with research as object, and adjectives with research here. And if you want to, you can click on one of the collocations and get examples of concordances showing the collocation in context. So there are lots of resources available, really good ones, where learners can see how language is really used. Collocations are shown, and the collocations shown are based on huge amounts of authentic language data from Corpora. So what you're seeing is really data-driven learning. You're looking at collocations taken from language data. I would risk saying here that corpus-based vocabulary textbooks and dictionaries are a little bit like the hands-off approach to data-driven learning, whereas corpora and corpus-based tools are like the hands-on approach. Because in the hands-on, the collocations are there, they are pre-selected for you. And in the hands-on, you can navigate the resources. But of course, there are some limitations. So some of the limitations of hands-on collocation resources in terms of like corpus-based EAP vocabulary textbooks. They're good for browsing collocations related to a certain topic. So if you're going to write something about the environment or business, you can go to that page and find lots of relevant collocations, but their coverage is quite limited because, you know, these are edited resources and there are only so many collocations that you can fit in. And it's not practical to consult these textbooks during writing, when you're writing a paper. Corpus-based dictionaries are really good, but their focus is on definition. So you need to navigate to the section on collocation to find it. And not everyone is very good at using dictionaries. And there's lots of evidence on dictionary use that sometimes users simply don't see the collocations that are there. Plus, there's also the problem of limited coverage because there's only so much space in a dictionary. If you use corpus-based collocation dictionaries, they focus on general English and the coverage is also limited. So the appendix in the Longman Dictionary of Collocations with the academic English collocations contains only 2,469 academic English collocations. So this is not a lot, as we shall see in a moment. And then there are limitations of these hands-on collocation resources. If you look up collocations in Corpora and corpus-based collocation tools, well, there's all the problems with hands-on DDL. Some Corpora and corpus tools are not particularly user-friendly. Learners don't always know how to build appropriate collocation queries. And then the raw data output from these unedited linguistic resources can be confusing to learners. They will often contain irrelevant and misleading information. And learners can be overwhelmed with too much information. Plus, users can misinterpret the results or get even distracted by the output because there's so much there. So there's this trade-off that we're talking about between quality and coverage. Speaking of hands-off collocation resources like dictionaries and textbooks, you have high quality. These have been carefully edited, but limited coverage. And if you're thinking of hands-on collocation resources like Corpora and these automatic collocation tools, you have a lot of coverage, but sometimes there's noise and inappropriate results interfering with the quality. And then there are other issues. Learners tend to overestimate their knowledge of collocations, and they will not look up collocations if they are not aware of their collocation limitations. So this can translate into errors or atypical word combinations and even less visible problems like the ones that I discussed earlier in the paper with Tavares Pinto. This includes collocation underuse and a limited collocation repertoire, which goes hand in hand with collocation in overuse, because writers who underuse collocations tend to overuse the fewer collocations that they do know. And even when learners are aware of their limitations, looking up collocations can interrupt thoughts and flow of words, especially during cognitively demanding tasks like academic writing. So how can we provide collocation assistance during writing? Well, that's why we developed Collocaid, a tool to help writers with general academic English collocations. And here's how it works. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the DDL, data-driven learning behind Collocaid. The first thing is that collocations are just shown, they're not explained. So you learn collocations by observing the collocations. And then concordances with collocations and contexts are also shown, not explained. And you can see here some collocations and context. The concordances with collocations and context also contain collocation cues where possible. So here you can see under distinct advantage, you can also see advantage of and advantage over. And then, as in the hands-off approach, the corpus output is linguistically edited. So writers don't get distracted by irrelevant or misleading or inappropriate corpus data or too much corpus data at once. But also, as in the hands-on approach, users can navigate the tool and they can look up the collocations they wish rather than ones pre-selected by the teacher. Our approach to collocation is not to start with a collocation itself, like conduct research, where can I fit that in my text, but to start with a collocation node, like research, and what verbs can I use with research. And we are focusing on nouns, verbs, and adjective nodes, because that's where really you start your thoughts from. You don't really start a sentence or a thought from an adverb or from a preposition. So what we cover are lexical collocations, like verbs that you use with research as an object, verbs that you use with research as a subject, or adverbs that you use with an adjective like apparent, or adverbs that you use with a verb like dramatically. We also have grammatical collocations. Some people call these syntactic patterns, like depend on or interested in. and also lexical and grammatical collocations. So you say increase in prices, but increase of 10%. So the preposition you use depends on both increase and prices or increase and percentage. Same here, based in Lisbon or based on data. Our coverage is informed by academic word lists. So we selected our collocation nodes from 3 academic word lists. The first one is the academic vocabulary list and the way it intersects with student writing so as to focus on novice academic writing vocabulary. We also use the academic keyword list, which focuses on academic keyness. And also we got nodes from the academic collocations list, which focuses on strong collocations. Our coverage is also informed by expert writing. So the way we selected collocations comes from corpus of expert English. Initially in our project, we began using the Pearson International Corpus of Academic English, but later on we got permission to use the Oxford Corpus, which fitted our purposes better. And it's a really good corpus with 70 million words of published academic English with lots of disciplines, and so it's quite representative. And we used and we researched collocation using e-lexicography tools. So we use Sketch Engine and word sketches where collocates are sorted according to its grammar relations. So we can focus on just like, for example, what adjectives are used with research. And here you have that. And these measures, like this is the co-occurrence frequency, how often do qualitative occurs with research in the corpus. And this is the strength of association measured, which I showed in the beginning, the logged ice score. So you can see that qualitative research is a very strong collocation. Our research also, you can see here in the tool that we show the collocations, only very strong collocations of 5 and above, and they're ranked. So qualitative research is stronger than future research, which is stronger. So you can see all of them ranked. And we only show co-occurrence of lexical collocations, which appears at least 10 times in the corpus and across at least 3 disciplines. That's so that we could focus on general academic English rather than collocations that are specific to only one discipline. We also selected examples from expert corpora. So you can see here some examples of prior research in the Oxford Corpus of Academic English. But we post-edited these examples to suit the users and uses of Collocaid. So the examples are considerably shortened in Collocaid so as to fit the screen, the writer's screen. And they are anonymized because, you know, academic English contains lots of references. We removed all of those. And if possible, we preferred examples that can be used in more than one discipline or that can be easily transferable to more than one discipline. And also, wherever relevant, we try to include examples with strong collocation cues. For example, some collocations are particularly especially used in the passive voice. Our coverage is quite large, as you can see here. So we started with 772 academic nodes, the academic lemmas, and this doesn't look much, but these are really from these academic word lists that we use. These are words that are very, very frequently used in general academic English, and they give rise to over 32,000 collocation suggestions, which is a lot more than you can find in the academic collocation list. And of these suggestions, we enhanced the top ones, the top almost 10,000 of them, with corpus examples that we carefully pre-selected. We also linked all the collocations to external examples from Scale in case you can't find an example within Collocaid. And what's also different about Collocaid is that our integration into the text editor has been informed by human-computer interaction research. So our prototype was developed in Tiny Mice, which is a widely used open source editor with a familiar interface, as you can see here. And you can use it on a browser and you don't need to install it. So it's compatible with lots of devices and operating systems. And it's really good for testing because usability testing was very important to the development of Collocaid. You can see here that the node prompts appear in green. And just by seeing these node prompts, it can help writers expand their collocation repertoire, because you can just check a collocation if you want to with, just by seeing these prompts, and find maybe collocations that you don't remember, or that you use less frequently, or even collocations that you don't feel confident enough to use, or collocations that you could be unreasonably avoiding. And Collocaid provides a kind of scaffolded access to collocations. So what you see first is just the top collocation for each paradigm. So what verbs you use with advantage, what adjectives you use with the advantage, what prepositions. So these are the strongest collocations here. If you want more, then you can expand it. But, maybe you don't need more and you can stop there and then and carry on with your writing. But if you want more, you can expand, for example, here, the adjective. And then you can see more adjectives used with advantage. And you can expand even more and get all the adjectives that are strong collocations on a sidebar. Another thing is that we took into account working memory constraints. That states that, you can only hold around 7 items in your working memory. So our menus, our intermediate menus are not very large. You can almost read all of these collocations at a glance. Because we have no more than 8 items listed. It's only in the last menu that you see a long list. And you can also see here that we show 3 examples of each collocation and context. So unlike dictionaries where you can only see 1 example of each collocation, we decided to add 3 here, because if you're not very sure of how to use prior research in your writing, seeing 3 examples together can clinch it for you. So how do you access Collocaid? Collocaid is free to use, and you just need to register, and that's so that we can account for our users and tell our funders lots of people are using Collocaid. And you just click here, try the prototype. And this is the prototype. It works online, and your texts are private. We cannot see or store them. And there are lots of ways you can use Collocaid in teaching. So you can, give your students fill in the gap exercises, like as a controlled way of raising collocation awareness. So here, for example, you can just cut and paste gapped sentences into Collocaid to teach about collocation awareness. You can also go further and teach about differences between using activities as the object and as the subject of the sentence. And you can see here that the verbs that you use with activity as object and as subject differ. So you wouldn't look at activity as subject for this sentence. You will look at activity as object. So this can help raise further awareness to collocation and grammar. You can also use Collocaid to raise awareness of which word governs the collocation. So here you can see two words have been underlined because the two of them are frequent academic words in our node list. But the one that you need to use to fill in this gap is not system, but adopted. And you can use Collocaid to raise awareness to preposition choice, and how the preposition you use may depend on both the word that governs the collocation and what follows it. So you can see here increase, and you can see what follows it: increase in, increase over, increase of, and the preposition you use depends on both. Of course, you can also encourage students to practice writing directly in Collocaid. So write an abstract in Collocaid, for example, and navigate it freely. And this will help them expand their vocabulary and maybe dare to use collocations that they are familiar with, but they haven't used before in their own writing. And you can also ask students to cut and paste texts and to try and improve their collocations with Collocaid. So you just need to click here to activate and deactivate the tool. Of course, Collocaid does not check spelling or correct mistakes. For that, you would need to go to your regular text editor. What we show are only collocation suggestions. So our tool is not a full-blown writing assistant. It's only a prototype that shows how collocations can be enhanced. Teachers can use Collocaid when marking. So you can just use Collocaid as a dictionary, and you can cut and paste words there to provide your students with better collocation suggestions. And although we do not correct errors, our tool focuses on collocation suggestions. We do have a separate database of common errors. And this includes 361 errors and other issues that have been found widely and frequently in academic English writing, plus possible solutions. So things like lexical choice errors, preposition choice errors, collocation use errors. So in this case, the problem of countability. Here, the problem of gerund infinitive. Here, the problem of formality in academic English. And we compiled this database from learner corpora, textbook suggestions, dictionaries, and grammars. If you want to look at that, you can just click here and you will get something like that. Or you can go to Figshare, where you can download our full data set as an Excel spreadsheet. So I checked yesterday, and we already have over 5,000 registered users, and most people using Collocaid for writing and revising, but it is being increasingly used for teaching as well. Most users are PhD students and master's students, but there are some undergraduates as well. And of course, there are fewer university lecturers and professors in the world, but you can see it's quite popular among them too. The main writing language of users is Chinese. And we had an influencer in China who has made a TikTok video about Collocaid and has talked a lot. And so that's why I think it's been so widespread in China, also because there are lots of Chinese researchers very actively writing in English. But you also can see here writers whose first language is English. And you can see Portuguese here stands out. And that's because probably because we did lots of usability testing in Brazil, thanks to my colleagues at Unesp and URGS. Key publications about the project. So if you want to read more, you can follow up these articles here, and they're all open access, which means you don't need a subscription to read them. And this is our project team. So we have funding from the UK Arts and Humanities Research Council. And my co-investigators are Professor Robert Lev from Poland and Professor Jonathan Roberts from Wales. And our key researchers are Gerent, Peter, and Nirva. So thank you very much for your careful attention, and I'm ready to take questions. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Anna. And such an interesting talk, such an interesting tool, and one that I'm sure that everybody now will be signing up for the prototype to have a play with that, and hopefully provide you with some research data from use of the prototype as well. I have collected a number of questions that I'm going to ask, but just before I do that, if you could just, I'm just going to share my screen here just to advertise our talk for next week, which will be held on Tuesday this time, and apologies for the constantly switching days, but we have to find a day and time that's suitable for our presenters. So this time around next week on the 23rd, Tuesday, same time, of course, we have Professor Alex Bolton, who is basically following on from the first seminar that I presented, feels like forever ago already, where we kind of problematized the field of DDL for possibilities for future improvements. Alex here is going to provide a longer overview of research in the field over the last 30 years, detailing a review of almost 500 DDL papers since 1989, work that he's been doing with Nina Vatkina. So tune in next week for another great presenter and another great talk. But for now, I'm going to stop the recording here, and then we'll get into the questions. Before we do that, can we just thank Anna, however we do this, over Zoom? Clap, please. I'm sure the rest of you are clapping. Comfort of your armchairs or wherever you happen to be watching us today. But thanks very much, Anna. A wonderful talk, and I will leave a link to Collocaid in the social media that goes out as well for our listeners at home around the world. Thanks very much, everyone, and we'll get into the questions right now.